right, welcome in. It's another episode of What's the Spread? My main man, Mr. Brad Thomas. I am Miles on Sports. The second college football playoff rankings have been revealed, and here we are.
Yes, Miles. I'm not too surprised by the committee where they're just going to keep jumping Cincinnati, especially after a gross performance against Tulsa. Like, come on. Those who say Cincinnati should be in the top four at this point are smoking on grass.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. Curious to see where you have Cincy in your rankings this week. Go ahead and hit me with your 10 through 7.
Yeah, so coming at number 10, I have Michigan State. Only 2 wins against teams with winning records, and that Miami win was a huge one. That Michigan game was a huge one, so I didn't punish them too much for losing to Purdue. Number 9, I have Oklahoma State. They were unranked in my top 10 last week. Number 8, I have Notre Dame, who moves up 2 spots, and number 7, Michigan, who's moved up from number 9. They looked a part of a top 10 team, almost looked a part of a top 5 team without that horrendous come from behind loss to Michigan State.
Okay. For my 10 through 7, I have Cincinnati making their way into my top 10 here with, I believe it was Baylor who got knocked out. So I will go ahead and award Cincinnati with top 10 spot. But as you said, just didn't look the part last week. I mean, repeatedly, Brad. I mean, it's week in and week out with these guys. And even when they come in and we think they're going to look the part, like you and I both thought, then they lay an absolute egg at home where you had game day there. It continues to boggle my mind that we've got Cincinnati sitting outside the top 5 here at number 5, and people are still upset that they're not in the top 4.
Yeah,
who's putting them in the top 4 at this point?
No one. And I want to say one thing. So I've gone on the Twitter world and I've wanted to see every single person's thought process on who their top 4 teams were. Last week, I couldn't tell you how many Cincinnati's I saw. This week, I see a lot of Cincinnati's casually out of those same believers' top 4s because they saw what we saw, but we've seen it for the past 3 weeks.
Right, and you can go undefeated with that schedule, but it doesn't make you an elite team. It doesn't make you a top 4 team. But I will award them with that top 10 spot. At number 9, I had Wake Forest drop down here after their loss to North Carolina. Still a very competitive game. One of the most wild college football games of the season. North Carolina came in as a 4-4 team, but I still see Wake Forest as a top 10 team right now. Oklahoma State at number 8. I think I had them at number 9 last week. Feel the same about them right now, pretty much. And then number 7 is where I have Oregon. I moved them up a spot, but I will continue to explain why I have Oregon so low down my list. So go ahead and hit me with your playoff teams and your first 2 out.
Yes, so my playoff teams, I have Georgia at number 1, Oklahoma at number 2, Alabama at number 3, Oregon at number 4. So that leaves my first 2 out. Number 1, Ohio State. Number 2, Cincinnati.
Gotcha. So you've got Cincinnati on your first 2 out.
Yes.
I mean, really, and also what the College Football Playoff Committee told us is that do they have a chance? But I think they'll just continue to get jumped.
I think so as well. Like, if you look at their top 4, Alabama loses, but Oklahoma, if they win out, bye-bye Cincinnati. Or I think there's a point now where we're starting to see that if Alabama loses a close game to loses a close game to Georgia in the SEC championship, and let's say like an Ohio State falls one time, or Oregon falls one time, or Oklahoma falls one time, I don't think the committee is afraid to put a 2-loss Alabama in there. Last week, I didn't have that sentiment, but that's what the rankings are really starting to look like.
That's a really interesting point that you just brought up because we have yet to see a 2-loss team in the playoff, but I wouldn't put it past the committee to put a 2-loss team in over Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, look at Texas A&M. If Texas A&M continues to do what I think they're going to do for the rest of the year, I think Texas A&M wins out. That's going to be a top 10 team. So they're going to have 2 top 10 losses. And I'm not the person who's going to say that's the right thing to do, but I would understand.
Yeah, that is a very interesting point. You never know with this year because it really feels like, 2 through 9 could go anywhere. So my top 4 has not changed. And as I said last week, I don't think it's going to change. I think these are the 4 teams we're going to see in the playoff. I have Georgia at 1. I've got Bama at 2. I think Bama beats Georgia, or I think Bama makes it to the SEC title game, beats Georgia. I got Ohio State at number 3, and I've got Oklahoma at number 4. And I will also say this. even if Oklahoma loses a game, they still may be in my top 4. I haven't made that decision yet. I think it would depend on how they looked and how I felt about them at that time. We'll talk about Oklahoma today. But a loss doesn't necessarily knock a team out of my rankings.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. So, and that's where I'm going with number 5 and number 6, because I've got Michigan at number 5 and I've got Michigan State at number 6. Those are my first 2 out. I only dropped Michigan State 1 spot for their loss to Purdue because of their overall resume. I did rank them behind Michigan, kind of going along what you said. I think Michigan just looks the part right now.
They do, yeah.
And I keep looking back to that Michigan State game. You can talk all you want about head-to-head. There's been so much uproar about why is Michigan ranked ahead of Michigan State. Well, there's plenty of reasons why Michigan is ranked ahead of Michigan State right now. It doesn't always just come down to head-to-head. We were talking about this last week. And yes, give Michigan State credit for getting that big win at home against Michigan. But that's just what it was. It was at home in a game that they had to come back in a game where Michigan looked the part for 80% of that game, ended up giving it away in the end. You can't take anything away from a loss because it was still a loss. Yes. But I got to think back to just what I've seen from Michigan as a whole, and I think anybody has any reason to rank Michigan ahead of Michigan State.
Yes, totally fair.
Because head-to-head is not the only factor that we're looking at here. Now, before we move on, I did a little project that I think you're really going to like.
Okay.
Because I was really, and we already talked about it a little bit, I was really tired of hearing about Cincinnati, and I wanted to put my point to make it numerical, because we talk about the strength of conferences, but I think sometimes people forget to look at why is the Power 5 and the Group of 5 2 different conferences, or consider 2 different leagues, because you can make that argument that it is at this point. Okay, this is just from last year, though. So I could have gone back, and maybe I will, but I could have gone back to more years to include more trends. But this is just 2020. This is the recruiting rankings. The average recruiting position I picked 6 conferences. Guess which ones? The 5 Power 5 and the American. All right.
Okay.
SEC obviously at number 1. Ridiculous, by the way. They are their average position in recruiting ranking is 23. Literally, their average recruiting ranking is top 25 with 14 teams. That is absurd.
Wow.
At number 2, you have the Big Ten. Surprise, right? SEC and the Big Ten at the top. Big Ten's at 35. ACC is actually right behind them at 36, but I think Clemson skews that a little bit.
Yeah.
Big 12 at 44. Pac-12 right behind them at 46. And guess where the American is?
Got to be like 80-something.
Ranking, 80. 80.
Wow, I did pretty good at that.
that was not bad. That gives you, and what I also should have done is done some kind of average Power 5 ranking. I mean, it's got to be what? Somewhere around 30, like 35, 36 is probably like average Power 5. If you want to do average Group of 5, it's probably lower than 80. Yeah. I didn't do all the other Power 5 conferences. So Cincinnati is playing a schedule right now where the average recruiting class is 80th. And, Alabama is playing a schedule right now where their average recruiting class is 23.
Yeah.
So how can you sit there and tell me that just because Cincinnati is undefeated means they belong in the top 4? All right? I am the first to admit this is a broken system, but you got to work with me a little bit, right?
Yeah. I agree.
Their job, the committee's job, is to get the best 4 teams in the playoff. All right? However they want to go about doing that is up to them. Their criteria has been a little hit and miss over the years, but overall they've been consistent.
Yes.
They've given the nod to the biggest and best programs in the country, so that when we get to the playoff, maybe it's the same teams every year, but maybe it means that you just got to beat those guys.
Yep.
Anyway.
Miles is like, I digress.
Let's talk about some games, right?
Okay, yes, let's do it, Miles. Let's go to the first game in college football. We have the number 11 Texas A&M Aggies taking on the number 15 Ole Miss Rebels. College game day site is going to be in Oxford, Miles. And listen, I know this is going to be an unpopular pick. I'm going to go with Texas A&M minus 2.5. I think about this Ole Miss team. They have a lot of things going against them right now. Yes, it's going to be an electric atmosphere in Oxford. It's going to be a tough place to play. Yes, they have one of the best coaches and one of the quarterbacks, but that quarterback is seriously banged up, and that quarterback is going for it way too much. I said this after Texas A&M beat us, that they're looking more like that top 4 potential team that they were supposed to be. Right. In the last 4 games, they're 4-0 against the spread, beating Alabama 41-38. Missouri 35-14. South Carolina 44-14, and Auburn 20-3. Against Ole Miss, they've owned this head-to-head in the last three. 3-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread. And on the road, they've been tremendous. 5-0 against the spread in their last 5 road games. I think it's going to be a tough bet for me to cover, but I do think that the Aggies pull it off. And if Corral weren't banged up and maybe Mingo was still available, I know he's been on the IR for some time, but there's just too many chinks in the armor of this Ole Miss team when this Texas A&M defense is finally starting to play very good. And I had to look at the home and road split. So this Texas A&M defense is only allowing 14.6 points per game. On the road, they're only allowing 13.67 points per game. I know that number jumps up a little bit at home because of Alabama, but still, they have been dominant this season, and they're really starting to look like that potential top 10 team.
Yeah, see, I was leaning Ole Miss here early on. As you said, college game day, it's going to be an electric environment in Oxford, but A&M is looking like an elite team right now. I'm going with A&M here minus 2.5. With 2.5, we really only need them to come away with the win. I went against them last week, picking Auburn, and what they did in that game last week, and not just last week, just recently, right?
Yeah.
Steelers rushed for over 100 yards in 3 straight games. The A&M defense has only allowed a total of 31 points in their last 3 games. What they're doing right now, Brad, is just controlling games.
Yeah.
And they're doing it by limiting their mistakes, controlling the ground game, and playing dominant defense. And Matt Corral hasn't looked the same in recent weeks once he's gotten into the meat of the SEC schedule. Ole Miss still a very good football team, 7-2. They're having a really good year. This is a big game for them. I don't know why game day is there. More on that later. But I think that what A&M is doing right now is an identity, right?
Yeah.
That as you mentioned, that we've been waiting to see. So I'm with you here. I got A&M winning, and I've got A&M possibly winning out.
Yeah, I like that a lot there. What do we have next?
All right, so next we got one I'm really excited about in the Big 12 because maybe we'll get to know a little bit more about number 8, Oklahoma, undefeated number 8, Oklahoma. 5.5-point favorites here at number 13, Baylor, a team that I talked a lot about last week, and we talked a lot about last week, and disappointed us.
Oh, Miles, gambling mistake number 1 on my end. Like, I should have never been wanting to handicap a look-ahead spot, an emotional game for TCU, do it for Patterson, but whatever. Baylor look ahead for this, and I think that Baylor is a live dog in this situation. Line was 6 points. I'm pissed that I missed out on 6, but give me plus 5.5. Listen, there's some crazy stats that are coming on in this game. So Baylor, in the last 5 games they've played against Oklahoma, they've covered the number. And I mean, last 4. 4 of the last 5 they played Oklahoma at home, they covered the number. They're 5-0 against the spread in their last 5 home games. As a dog, 11-4-1 against the spread. They've only lost one, I tell you this, one home game by more than 6 points in their last 19 home games. This Oklahoma defense is going to be the problem. I think Baylor's offense can keep up. And much like TCU, we could see a bit of a shootout. I really think Baylor has a chance to win it, but 6 points is a lot for a game that I think is going to be heavily contested.
Yeah, the trends are really good for Baylor here, but I'm definitely going Oklahoma. I just think that they've been a completely different team since Caleb Williams has took over. Now, it does scare me that they did not play last week and the fact that Baylor always plays them tough, but I can't get out of my head, emotional or not emotional, TCU torches Baylor last week for 458 yards through the air. And my man Caleb Williams is coming off a 6-touchdown performance against Texas Tech a couple of weeks ago. In order for Baylor to stay in this game, they're going to have to rely on their ground game, which was really good before the TCU game. We could definitely see that return here, but they're going to have to keep the ball out of Oklahoma's hands. It is a high number, but I like the Sooners here.
Yeah, this is Oklahoma defense who is pretty good on the ground. I think the problem that Oklahoma is going to have defensively is they suck through the air. Their pass defense is awful. They're almost allowing 275 yards through the air per game. So we'll see what happens. I like a high scoring game, and typically I'm the opposite of my normal handicap. Is when it's high scoring, I normally take the bigger favorite. And then when it's low scoring, I normally take the bigger dog. But I think that Baylor's a live underdog in this situation. And I think that I gave them the kiss of death. That number 2 spot in rankings is scary, man. And I put them number 2 in my rankings.
All right. Moving on to a game that this is the game that I'm most excited about, and I want to know why College Game Day is not in Winston-Salem.
Yes.
For number 16 NC State and number 12 Wake Forest. You want to talk about disrespect? I mean, listen, I know Clemson isn't any good this year, but that means that you have to keep going to SEC games that don't even mean anything. You could talk about Ole Miss, Texas A&M all you want. Ole Miss isn't winning the West. This game right here is for the Atlantic Division.
Yes.
Two really good teams. Night game. I feel like Wake Forest would have been a way more fun spot for College Game Day this week. But anyway, let's talk about the line. Wake Forest -2. As I said, the winner is pretty much going to be in the driver's seat for the Atlantic Division. And keep in mind, this is the same division that Clemson is in. What a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
We have a game for the division that's not going to be Clemson. That's pretty crazy. I want to hear where you're leaning here.
Listen, every part of me does not want to handicap this game outside of taking the total. I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to say this loud. This is going to be one of my write-ups for excuse me, I'm writing for so many companies now. I'm losing train of thought for Bet Karma, but I'm going to be on the over in this game, 4-5 in the last 6 Wake games. But listen, I'm backing Wake Forest. If it weren't to that great high-powered UNC offense, Sam Hartman and Wake Forest get it done. If it weren't for, and I don't say this often, I didn't have any money on the Wake Forest game, so guys, don't think that I'm just being a sourpuss bettor. If it weren't for the referees, Wake Forest probably would have came home victorious in this game. They missed that pass interference call that was egregious miss. And now it's up to Devin Leary in North Carolina State to try to keep up with Wake. I don't think they do so. The last time North Carolina State, mind you, when they had to keep up with a very high-powered offense was that Miami game, and they couldn't keep up. They couldn't go toe for toe. 1-10 in their last road games against Wake Forest is a huge, huge mark. It's honestly, can't even say it's a battle of the defenses because we know there's going to be no defensive plays. It's a battle of the offenses. This is Wake Forest offense is averaging 44 points per game versus UNC's 31 points per game. And it's going to be a night game. Oh, my God. In-state rivalry game. Oh, come on. Give me Wake Forest all day. It's going to be so fun. Like, my eyes are going to be glued on this. I'm going to be at the sports book just chilling, man.
Yeah, give me Wake Forest here, especially with only -2, really just looking for a win. You know, what's funny in that North Carolina game, I almost came away even just as impressed as I was with Wake Forest even before the game. I mean,
yes.
Look at how close they were, Brad, to rolling in here, continuing to be undefeated. I mean, it was a situation where if Wake Forest just would have found a way to win that game, this is a legitimate team. Sam Hartman and company can move the ball against anybody. Yeah, that defense is struggling. They couldn't stop the run. But also keep in mind, they held Sam Howell to 216 yards through the air. Now, you could argue that North Carolina didn't have to do much in that game through the air, but still a pretty impressive number. And also, it was a collapse from Wake Forest. You
Big time.
mentioned the referees, but just North Carolina scores 24 points in the fourth quarter to win that game. I mean, Wake Forest had that game well in hand.
Yeah.
Just a wild finish, and my heart goes out to Wake Forest because I was really pulling for them to pull off the undefeated season. And really, they've shown to be that talented. Now, on the other side of the ball for NC State, their defense only allowing 16 points per game. But keep in mind, you know, they gave up 31 to Miami a couple weeks ago. They really haven't played any high-powered offenses. There really aren't many high-powered offenses in the ACC until you get to Wake Forest, right?
Wake Forest, North Carolina State, and UNC. That's about it.
Right. So, you know, Pittsburgh does it with defense. Virginia does it with defense. So, I mean, turnovers really hurt Sam Hartman too in that game. He kind of gave the game away in the end. So he's got to make – but dude doesn't really make mistakes in the beginning. Wake Forest just comes out and hits you in the mouth. So
yeah. Oh, my God. They're so fun to watch. And, like, this is College Game Day messed up. Like, we really don't care that much about the TAMU game. What's on deck for us next, Miles?
All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up with Mississippi State at number 17, Auburn. Mississippi State quietly having a pretty solid year.
My gosh,
It was pretty much a disaster last year, but Leach is really getting his boys together. 3-3 in a very competitive SEC West. Going at Auburn, number 17, 5.5 point favorites. I will go ahead and start here. I did a write-up last week on the Mississippi State-Arkansas game, and I took Mississippi State +4.
Nice.
Cover for me. Losing that game 31-28. I'm going to take them here for very similar reasons because they've been very consistent with what I've been seeing from Mike Leach and his offense in Mississippi State. Will Rogers. Dude was 36 of 48 last week for 417 yards and 4 scores, and he doesn't do it with bombs. He does it with nickeling and diming it down the field. Completing 75% of his passes on the year. they're hard. They're difficult to stop. And with Auburn, I know it was the A&M defense, but coming off that 3-point performance, I don't have much faith in them in this one. I think they bounce back and get the win. But I see Mississippi State for a second week in a row. I think they come through for me, and I think that they can keep this game competitive, keep it out of the hands of Auburn just enough to stay in the game. So this is my dog for the week.
So when I start to handicap games, I like to do things where I'll put a player's name and I'll ask myself a question. The question was, Will Rogers, can he push this offense forward after a close game versus Arkansas? I think he can. However, I'm going to back Auburn here. Reason being, I have to compare Arkansas's defense to Auburn's defense. This is a great Auburn defense. They're only allowing, 20 points per game. I think that this is a funny stat because it just matches up so perfect. When Auburn scores 25 points or more, they are 4-1 against the spread and 5-0. You know how many points Mississippi State allows per game? 25.3. Man, this Mississippi State looks so much better with Rogers. So I kind of want to throw out the last 2 years. 24-10, 56-23, where Auburn covered both those numbers with ease. I just like that. The trends back up Auburn, covered in 2 of 3 games as favorites of 5.5 or more. This 5.5 number has been very interesting if you've been monitoring it this season, where favorites of 5.5 have covered often. And it's numbers that open at 5.5, not so much like the 6 growing down, but numbers that go up to the 5.5. I'm just going to go ahead and trust that they have a big bounce back here. And they're 3 weeks from the Iron Bowl. So it's good to start tuning up. Why not do it with 2 weeks from the Iron Bowl, 3 weeks from the Iron Bowl, 2 weeks from the Egg Bowl, if I said that right? Something like that.
Yeah, hard to believe that we're getting that close to the
so close. So I'm going to go and back Auburn here. I don't like taking spreads this big for games I think are going to be kind of close, but I just got to think defense wins out and Auburn becomes kind of more of what we saw in the beginning of the season. They're not playing against a Texas A&M. Like Mississippi State's heading in the right direction, but they're not quite there yet.
All right, my man.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening to this first segment. I want to invite you to following What's the Spread on Twitter at what'sthespread_. If you're listening on YouTube, please press the subscribe button and hit the like button. All right, Miles, let's get into some NFL.
Let's do it. First up, we got the New Orleans Saints at the Tennessee Titans. The Titans are 3-point favorites here at home. Titans came through for me last week. I never expected them in all of the universes to get the win, but they did. But Stafford pretty much gave that game away.
Yeah, he did
right in the beginning by spotting them all those points. I've been back and forth on this one, and still up until now I am. But the fact that Adrian Peterson only had 21 yards on 10 carries, it just tells me that just too many things went right for the Titans on Sunday Night Football. I'm taking the Saints here +3. I feel like I have written here, is it sustainable, right? So they lose Derrick Henry. They immediately go from 4 to 8-point dogs to the Rams last week. They end up getting the win. But overall, the Titans defense has not looked that good. They looked really good last week. It was a part of the reason that they got the win. But the Saints have come through for me in recent weeks, most notably against Tampa Bay. So I'm going to take him here +3.
Well, you made a statement that Titans defense hasn't looked that good. It's all relative. So the Titans defense hasn't looked that good compared to what a good defense would look like. But the Titans defense has looked so much better than the Titans have in the past 2 years. For that reason, I'm backing the Titans. Listen, last game, their run game was terrible. Foreman, 5 for 29, McNichols, 7 for 24, Peterson, 10 for 21. But we have to compare apples to apples, where we have to know that the New Orleans Saints defensive line is not nearly the same caliber as the Los Angeles Rams. Trevor Siemian wasn't bad in the loss to Atlanta, but come on, the Saints sucked for 3 quarters. If you suck against Ryan Tannehill, this Titans team, it's time we start believing. This Titans team is good, man. If you suck against them, you're going to get down early. It's going to be tough to come back. 5-0 gets a spread in their last 5. 5-0 straight up in their last 5. It's time we put some respect on Tannehill's name. I was the first person to disrespect him that said they relied too heavily on the play-action pass game. Tannehill was just average in that game. I think he only threw for 124 yards and a touchdown and interception. But the defense is doing enough to kind of keep them motivated, at least after one game. I hate having to think that we're going against 2 very unknown teams at this moment, because we have the Saints with Trevor Siemian and the Titans without Derrick Henry. But I'm just going to have to go with the better team and then the better quarterback.
All right, what's next?
Next, we have the Cleveland Browns taking on the New England Patriots. Guys, don't look now, but the Patriots are so close to coming back in the AFC title race. I'm going to start this off. I'm back in the Patriots. I really hate that I didn't get the plus money. I tried to get it and lock it in so much, but the line has moved from Patriots plus 2.5 to -1. I think if once you get a little bit past the 3-point mark, you don't take it. No Kareem Hunt, no Nick Chubb for the Cleveland Browns. I don't care about that too much because one thing that I wanted to highlight the Patriots has been their elite defense. Matthew Judon's been playing out of his mind. Christian Barmore has been playing very good. J.C. Jackson, what do you have? 2 picks last game. And one thing that I've noticed, just because I've been I want to say casually, but I think I've watched every single Patriots game with really a magnifying glass because of Mac Jones. But McDaniels has been able to kind of explore their offensive philosophy a little bit more. I think he's getting a little bit more comfortable with Mac Jones, or Mac Jones is looking a little more comfortable, which makes him a little bit more of a threat. Early in the season, you kind of were like, Mac Jones is kind of limited in the options that they're giving him. 4-2 against the spread in their last 6 games. And listen, historically, the Browns have been terrible against the Patriots. 2-6 against the spread in their last 8. 1-7 in their last 8 against Patriots. I am kind of afraid that this Browns team's defense might beat Mac Jones up a little bit, but I don't think that defense is that much more improved than the Panthers. So give me the Patriots just to win the game. I'll take it.
Yeah, I'll keep it simple here. I'm going with the Browns. I try not to overreact week to week, but they literally made Joe Burrow just look like an absolute shell of himself last week, consistently getting to the quarterback. I think they do the same thing against Mac Jones here. I'm not going to say that OBJ is the difference in this team because I'm still not that high on the Browns overall, and I wasn't at the beginning of the season either. But Cleveland also on the road in their last 6, 5-1 against the spread. So
I saw that.
Here, it's essentially a money line. I still don't think that highly of the Patriots, but I do agree with you. I have been impressed with Mac Jones' development so far in his rookie year, just as the same as I've been impressed with Justin Fields too.
Yeah.
After his performance last Monday, so you were starting to see these rookie quarterbacks kind of come into their own. All right, let's go ahead and head over to Sunday Night Football. The Kansas City Chiefs are coming in here as 2.5-point favorites on the road against the Las Vegas Raiders. I will go ahead and start here. Kansas City is 3-16-1 against the spread in their last 20 games. I know that the spreads have gotten more favorable for the Chiefs, and they should have. Vegas finally figured it out, but I'm going to go with the Raiders here. Derek Carr looked horrible last week. Do not get me wrong. He was awful last week in a loss to the Giants. But I got a huge bounce back spot here from Derek Carr, who much better competition here than what the Chiefs have with Jordan Love. And the fact that the Chiefs only mustered 13 points last week and they continue to struggle on that side of the ball, I think they're going to and listen, here's the other thing that scares me is against the Raiders. I think it was in their last 13 against the Raiders. They're 8-5 against the spread. So they've had a lot of success there, but it's just so tempting to take the home dog in prime time here. So I'm going with the Raiders.
Miles, when I think about having to bet Sunday Night Football, it reminds me of Denzel Washington when he's like, yeah, that brother's starving. I think that I'm 0-4 in my last primetime bets in the NFL that aren't props or team totals or game totals, but listen, I'm going to be on the Raiders this game. I can't get over this. Listen, I'll give you a couple reasons why I'm going to try to keep it a little bit more short. The line opened at -3 for the Chiefs, right? 66% of the bets are on the Chiefs, but why is the line coming down? The line's getting closer and closer to Raiders. So from the start of the season, at the very start of the season, the Kansas City Chiefs were ranked between 1 and 3 in offensive efficiency rating. And we've seen that slip to now. The Kansas City Chiefs are ranked 10th in offensive efficiency rating. The one thing that they could really hang their hats on was their offense. Their offensive line has been freaking god-awful. I think that Crosby and the Raiders get home a lot more. And listen, this is funny funny comparison. Derek Carr has more passing yards than Patrick Mahomes and less interceptions. Who would have thought that's going to happen? I'm going to back the Raiders. I think the Death Star is going to be rocking. And, man, there's no way I'm jumping on the public with home dogs getting all this love.
Yeah, especially home dogs have been good in primetime. So
yes.
Going with the Raiders. All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up, my man. The Minnesota Vikings at the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are 2.5-point favorites here. I think either team can legitimately win this game. The Vikings have been so close, including last week, a very close loss to the Ravens. The week before, Cowboys without Dak, they almost got the win there, but I'm taking the Chargers here because the spread is just too small. The Chargers are 6-2 against the spread in their last 8 as a favorite. I know they haven't really looked the part, but this was one of the games I picked. It was just too tempting because I think the Vikings. I think these two teams are going into separate directions. The Vikings coming in here desperate at 3-5 on the road, and I think that the Chargers here, really for me, only needing a win here. I'll go with San Diego.
I'm going with the Chargers as well. Listen, is Dalvin Cook even going to play this weekend? I think that it's Alexander Madison time, but like I said, I have one question mark that I ask about every team that I really base my analysis off because I need to know. And my question for this game was, could the Chargers D-line be too much? I think that at one point in the second half, late in the fourth quarter, the Vikings only had 12 second half yards. And this is against a lowly Ravens team who is god-awful defensively, who you could pick apart with big runs and big passes. I think they're going to see a much different defense, and it could be a little bit too much for them. I'm going to back the Chargers. They got it done barely against Philly. But listen, I'll be the first person to say I'm okay with changing my opinion after I've thought about a game of a lot. That Chargers game, when I picked Philly on the podcast, I instantly placed double the amount of money, and I posted on Twitter that we are backing the Chargers because I had to call a spade and know exactly what we're getting. There's just teams who can compete with the Chargers, those high-powered offenses, the guys who have a lot better offensive lines. They have some kind of catalyst in their offense. Without Dalvin Cook, I don't think Alexander Madison's the same caliber of Dalvin Cook, so we're not getting those huge, big runs. He might end up with 100 yards, but I still think that this defensive line is going to be a little bit too much for the Minnesota Vikings offensive line.
All right, I like that we agree on those last two. And also, man, just before we end, I think this is going to be one of the most exciting finishes to a college football season that we've had in a long time, and I cannot wait to talk about all of it with you as we get closer to our favorite day of the year, Conference Championship Saturday.
Yes. I was like, I'm going out of town for conference championship or for a rivalry week for college football. And I go, there's too much on the line. We cannot be anywhere but in a bar because this is going to be the most exciting.
You're not going to leave me on our day.
Miles, thanks for doing this podcast with me, man. I always appreciate when we can talk about college football, talk about NFL, talk about betting, honestly. Guys, thank you so much for listening to What's the Spread. One more time, I invite you to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Download the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or however else you get your podcasts. Take care.